Welcome to the SHT podcast. This podcast is created by superhumans, for superhumans, and anyone else who wants to look, feel, and perform like a freaking badass. Your holistic health journey starts here. Rediscover how we...
Yeah!
Paul, sit your ass down.
All right. Hey, what's going on, y'all? Sitting out here in the sun. Beautiful day. And I had a concept that I wanted to cover that I thought was really interesting because we talked about it at me and Colby's last health and performance conversations at the CrossFit Combine. And it was a really good topic, and we've kind of honed it and enhanced it. We may talk about it again when we do a recap of the conversation, but I thought it was really useful information I wanted to share. And it just revolves around how we look at food and what we're putting into our bodies to help give us some leverage to do the right thing when we're in a situation where we're trying to make a good choice. And, inevitably it happens that we're talking to people and we get these questions. And so recently we had the question with a couple of members, and it was basically, what do you think about oatmeal? And we get questions all the time about, what do you think about, and just fill in the blank, right? But what do you think about oatmeal? And I thought about it for a second as we're sitting there, and I'm like, when I look at this body and what I'm trying to do and build with this body, I don't see oatmeal as being a big part of that. And then it kind of led into this conversation about, what are we really trying to do with food? What are we trying to do when we eat food? What is food to our body? And that's the topic of this conversation, is really understanding that you are what you eat, right? And what we put in our body contributes to the building of this body, all right? So when we ask people, why are we eating food? What is the purpose of food in the body? It's a really interesting question. The majority of people, the answer that they give us is, well, we eat for energy. I mean, almost every time, right? And then some people that really think about it, of course, they may say, well, we're eating to nourish the body or something like that. So I want us to understand that food builds the body. Right? Food is what builds the body. When I look at this body, and I'm looking at my arms and my legs and my hands and my fingers, like, where does all that come from? Because the body regenerates itself over and over and over. These cells replace themselves. Some of them very fast, some of them takes, weeks and months, but at some point this body is continually rebuilding itself and regenerating itself. And so understanding that, I'm not getting this body from the air that I breathe. I'm not getting this body from the water that I drink. The only place that I am building this body from is the food that I eat. So when we eat food, what is the purpose of food? Well, one of the biggest purposes of food to us in our realm is understanding that it contributes to building the body. So we want to eat things that support building this amazing, adaptable, flexible, dynamic body. And this should automatically start to dictate some of the foods that you eat and don't eat. Because when I eat some junk food, if I eat a donut, there's very little in that donut that becomes a part of my body. The majority of that donut is complete toxicity and waste. So we're either excreting it out of the body, or it's disrupting what's happening inside the body to some degree, right? This is why we choose our definition of real food. This is why we want to think in terms of, when I eat, I want to eat things that support building this amazing body. And that automatically should start to clarify what things I want to consume and what things I want to avoid. All right, so of course, animal meats and traditional fats are a huge part of that, because when I look at my body is muscle, it's skin, it's tendons, it's ligaments, it's cartilage, it's connective tissue, it's bone, it's nails, it's hair, and then it's a lot of fatty tissue. So some of the best things that I can consume, honestly, are going to be animal meats and fats, and that's why we always recommend, when eating animal meats, we want to focus on bone in, skin on, and fatty cuts. And then to the degree that we're comfortable, we want to consume animals nose to tail, which means bone stock and collagen, and trying to get organ meats and things like that in. But you just have to understand that, my body is being built from the food that I eat. Or it's being, poorly built from the food that I eat, depending on what I'm eating. All right, so eating to build the body is something very, very important to understand. So when I'm presented with a food, I can automatically think to myself, is this something that's supporting this amazing, beautiful body? Does it contribute to what I know or think that I know that this body is made of? And if not, it has to be suspect, okay? Now, we also want to eat in a way that trains the body how to use an alternate fuel source, which is ideally fat for fuel, okay? So most people think that they need to eat food for energy. Well, ideally, we want our energy to come from our excess body fat stores. And one of the ways that we do that is we consume healthy fats, traditional fats with our main meals and with our snacks. Actually, we'd recommend consuming fat with everything that you eat, because when we eat, we want a signal of nutrients to build the body, and we also want a signal of fat for fuel. Now, understanding carbohydrates are the opposite of fat, I don't know that most people understand what we mean when we say that. So, what are carbohydrates? Well, in our world, carbohydrates are dominant sources of starch and sugar. And when you understand what those get broken down into, which is mainly glucose and fructose, those are things that the body can use very, very easy for energy, right? It's like kindling on a fire. It goes really fast. The body can use it really easy and fast. It can only use limited amounts of it, and then it has to store it. And carbohydrates are the opposite of using fat for fuel, or glucose is the opposite of fat for fuel. So anytime I consume starch or sugar or dominant carbohydrates, I am in the opposite direction of training my body how to use fat for fuel, which is my ultimate goal, because the body already understands how to use glucose and sugar and starch. Because remember, our bloodstream always has some certain amount of glucose in it, because if I don't consume it, my body's making it. So my body always understands that. But when I consume glucose, I disrupt fat burning. All right, so in our world, carbs need to come from the right sources at the right time of day, and they need to be moderated. This is what we call strategic carb consumption, or being strategic with our carbohydrates. They need to be real food based, which is, our definition of real food includes safe starches, and it also includes like natural fruits and maybe a little bit of honey, but it needs to be real food based. We prefer to have our carbohydrates timed at the end of the day or later in the day, because we want to train the body how to use fat for fuel for the majority of the day. And then we want to make sure that those carbohydrates are moderated in amounts, right? Which say the sweet spot for most people, I think, is about a half a cup of fruit and a half a cup of starch per evening. But being flexible with it, you can go up to 3/4 of a cup of each. And that's a lot of carbohydrates. And at the same time, it's relatively low carb compared to the standard American diet. All right. So then we also want to make sure that we have space in between meals. So here's another crucial concept that I don't know many people fully understand. What is my body fat? Like, what is the fat that I have on my body, whether I'm lean or whether I'm overweight? Like, what is that body fat for? Well, that body fat is emergency fuel. It is fuel for when I'm not eating. I wouldn't even say emergency, because it's meant to be this very flexible fuel source that my body can tap into very easily when I'm not eating. Okay, so, from an evolutionary perspective, fat is there to fuel me when I don't have food, whether that's a few hours or a few days or a few weeks. So the only time that I can get my body to tap into my fat stores for fuel is when I'm not eating, so I have to have natural space in between meals. I think for most people, something very doable is 2 meals per day with no snacking. At the most, you'd want to have 3 meals per day, no snacking. But most of our people do 2 meals per day, no snacking, and then we're always experimenting with fasting protocols and pushing the boundaries as far as how much space we have. All right, so we want to have this balance and this ebb and flow of eating for nutrients. And when we eat, we want to eat nutrient-dense foods. We want to have traditional fats to give the body a dietary signal of fat for fuel. Then we need to have space in between meals so that the body moves from dietary fat for fuel to body fat for fuel. It's a very easy switch for it. This is how we train the body how to use fat for fuel. All right, why might this be beneficial? Well, that is what it's for, okay? And the reason this is beneficial is because for me to continually fuel the body on carbohydrates or glucose or starch or sugar, I have to do that all the time, because I eat a little bit, I get a spike, I have a crash, I have to eat a little bit more. It is the way that the body is meant to be. It is less damaging for the body. It has less oxidative stress. Once my body understands and learns how to tap into my excess body fat stores for fuel, then I start to optimize my body composition, because my body doesn't see as much of a need to store so much fat. All right, and then also this is what translates for our people into consistent energy levels, because remember, we have almost an unlimited amount of energy in our fat stores, definitely enough to get us through, space in a day and days, if we experiment with some extended fasting, maybe even weeks. And so this will give us consistent energy levels without the crashes because it's there all the time. And for those of us that are athletes, teaching the body how to use its own body fat for fuel leads to better performance because we have metabolic flexibility and the body starts to learn the difference and when to tap into body fat stores for fuel or when to use muscle glycogen for fuel or emergency response hormones for fuel. And ultimately, this leads to freedom. It leads to freedom from food because this is what contributes to satiety and not feeling like you have to eat all the time. I mean, when we eat amazingly. We eat gloriously. We eat amazing food. But those of us that have been doing this for any amount of time, we're not ruled by food anymore. We have a lot of freedom, right? Freedom from meal prep or meal timing and planning all the time and carrying stuff around and racing to our next meal and thinking about what we're having for breakfast and thinking about what we're having for lunch. And I mean, it's one of the most amazing aspects of our way of doing things is this natural sense of freedom that we experience from it compared to how we were doing things before. All right. So this is our basic rules, and this is how we do this. When we eat, we want to make sure that we eat for nutrients. We want to eat to facilitate this amazing body, which means that the majority of our foods need to be nutrient dense and also include traditional fats. Right? Traditional fats give the body a fat signal for fuel at mealtime, and then the nutrient-dense foods, especially the animal meats and the superfoods and the organs, the bone stock and things like that, give the body what it needs to build this amazing body. And of course, vegetables and things are great. They serve a different purpose. We do get some nutrients out of vegetables. They're also very detoxifying, and we get some vitamins and things we might not get from animal foods. But to build this body, a primary focus needs to be animal foods and traditional fats, right? When we eat, we typically want to have fat with our meals. Actually, I'd say there's not a time you wouldn't want to have fat with your meals, even if it's a snack, because we want to reinforce this signal of fat for fuel. And then we want to make sure that we have space in between meals so that the body learns how to tap into its own body fat stores for energy. And then, of course, we want to be strategic with our carbs and make sure that they're from real food sources. We have resources on this that you can check into, but basically sweet potatoes, yams, white potatoes of any kind. We prefer white rice over brown rice, traditional tubers, ancestral tubers, like yucca and taro and cassava and plantains. Things like that are real food sources of carbohydrates. And then, of course, fruits. We love honey, and we're okay with a few other things, but those would be the top ones, right? So we want to be strategic with our carbs, meaning they need to be from real food. We want to time those later in the day, and we want to measure those out to a sweet spot of about a half a cup of each of starches and sugar, all right? That's the magic. That's how we do this whole thing, right? We want to eat 100% real food as often as we can, understanding that anything else is not really serving us. There's things that we consume that are approved, that are made with the right ingredients, but they're not really doing what we're talking about here today. So if I have, I want to treat myself to some Strauss ice cream, which is perfectly fine on occasion, I just have to understand that Strauss ice cream is probably not serving many purposes inside my body. I'm eating it for the enjoyment of it. And I have to understand that, right? If I have some chips, some Siete chips or some Jackson's Honest or something like that, again, made with the right ingredients, cooked in the right fats, those are fine, but they're not contributing to the structure of this body very much, right? It's enjoyment. And that's fine. We want to have those options, but they shouldn't be our primary focus, right? We want to look at our body and think, well, is this thing going to support my body? And if not, then it has to be suspect, and I have to have some caution with it, okay? And that's perfectly fine, doing that on occasion, all right? So we want to eat 100% real food, focus on nutrient density. When we have carbs, time it later in the day, make sure it's from the right food sources, make sure that we measure those things out, make sure that we have space in between meals, and that's really what it, and then processed food, things that are just made with toxic ingredients, there's no role for that over the long term. Now, all of us are meeting this where we can, and maybe we're transitioning, maybe we're learning how to navigate this, and that's fine, but I feel like this kind of a concept will help us to do that, because we want to eat things that serve this amazing body, and we want to eat in a way that facilitates the body using its own body fat for fuel. That's the ultimate goal. That is what is going to lead to the happiness that we're looking for from this way of eating. All right? So, hope that was useful, and give us some feedback. Let us know. All right, love you guys.
Thank you guys for listening.
Yeah, so remember, the purpose of this podcast is to support our SHT community and to be in your ear as a go-to resource for all things SHT.
If any of you have fallen off, if you need support, honestly, just come back and listen to some of these episodes. Get re-inspired, get re-motivated, and get re-engaged. If you're new to us, the best way to get started is by joining our newsletter at sht4life.com.
That's SHT, the number 4, life.com. And you can also find us on Facebook at Superhuman Transformation, and then on Instagram, Superhuman Transformation, which you're doing an amazing job with.
Thank you.
And then also Twitter, it's SHT, the number 4, life. I think that's all we got.
See ya.